Let me invite you to turn in your Bibles to the book of Ruth. We are going to be in the book of Ruth. We'll be in chapter 1 this morning. If you need any help finding it, it's always fair game to look in the concordance here. If you're using the Bible that we've got hard copies here, pulled up on your smartphone. I'm reading from the ESV this morning. However you find the text, let me encourage you to open it up as we study this really, really important book. Now, before we get there, I want to tell you a story. Not long ago, I found myself sitting at a bar having dinner next to a strange woman, okay? It's an odd way to begin a sermon, kind of ominous if you're a pastor, I guess. I was going to... There's a small group here that I try to get to when I can. I can't do it super often, but I was waiting to go to the small group. I had an appointment that canceled, and I was just trying to find somewhere for a quick meal before we went to small group. So I ended up going to this restaurant, and I was kind of low on time. They said, sorry, we don't have any tables, but if you want to order, a burger at the bar top, you can. I said, that's fine, So I'm sitting there. And I have some Stoic philosophy with me. That's what I was reading. And I'm just sitting there by myself, eating some food, reading philosophy. Well, this woman who's sitting next to me says, what are you reading? So we strike up a conversation about Stoic philosophy. It went about as long as you imagined it would. People are like, okay, that's weird. I don't know, it's interesting reading. So I'm talking with her, and I find out she's new to the city, moved here recently from somewhere down south for work. And it's just saying things like, I don't know, I'm trying to figure out, how do I get involved here? Like, what do I do? I mean, I don't know what the dating scene's like here. Where do people go at night for fun? I said, don't know. I'm really way far removed from any of that. I don't know at all. But I asked the question. I said, well, are you connected to any sort of a church or a faith community? Just, as a way to and it opened up a conversation. And the conversation turned towards things about a spiritual upbringing and a grandma who had an influence on her life, but that's not been part of her journey. And anyway, I'm trying to finish my burger and get to my group. And she starts crying. By the way, this happens to me more often than you might suspect, okay? There's something about when you feel seen, it catches you a little off guard. And we're unfamiliar with that experience. And so it kind of is like a quasi-counseling session. I didn't know if we're supposed to hug at the end of the meal. I mean, I don't know what we're doing here. But she just goes in this mode where she was, just kind of pouring this out. And here's how she ends this, by the way. This is very common. After all this, the tears and, the soggy tablecloth and whatever, she goes, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. What's interesting about that, a lot of times when people cry, they express grief, they apologize. Have you ever found yourself doing that? Especially if it's public. If you're somewhere where people can see and you start getting emotional, 9 times out of 10, people say, I'm so sorry. It's not just an embarrassment. It's actually something that has to do sometimes with illness. I'll visit people at the hospital, and they'll almost apologize for being sick. There's something going on here. I watched this as I was thinking about this message. I was up at Carl Schurz Park and just writing, and I was watching these kids play. These little kids are my favorite. They're the best. Adults are pretty boring. I love kids. I love watching kids. They're so full of life, and you see these little kids, 3 years old, they kind of run around, they fall, skin and knee, and just the eruption of tears, and they run to caregiver. Whoever that is, mom, dad, nanny, whoever it is, they just immediately, they go from pain to I'm going to people for comfort. There's another group of kids, late elementary, starting to lean into middle school. What happens when one of those kids gets hurt? They immediately close off. It goes into shame, it goes into embarrassment, it goes into hiding. Something happens. When you're this little kid, there's this, if something goes wrong, if there's a tragedy in my life, if it feels big and overwhelming, my first instinct is to push in, is to go wherever I think I'm going to find that comfort. But we learn somewhere along in life, I don't know if it's vulnerability, I don't know if it's just feeling overwhelmed and trying to make sense of the situation, but something happens where it shifts, and all of a sudden, when things go wrong, we tend to pull back and pull away. This isn't just true of little kids and random strange women at a bar. She wasn't strange. She was a lovely person. It was an unusual encounter. This is actually true in our spiritual life as well. In fact, what we've learned in society and how we interact with the people around us is kind of similar to how we also interact with God. When tragedy strikes, the number one question that people ask is, do you know what it is? Why? Why? And why becomes a block for us. And if we can't answer the question, or if we feel like that's the only way we can even frame the question, then we end up pulling back even from God. I had a bizarre series of events, all within like a 1-2 week period. I had 3 separate young women call the church, this is when I was in another state, call the church and say, I'd like to talk to Brian Newby. Okay. So I get on the phone with them and they say, you don't know me, but I'm a part of the church. I'm getting married in less than 6 months, and I just found out my fiance, some knucklehead guy over here, has said, I don't think I actually believe in God anymore. And it's like, the carpet came out from underneath me. I don't know what to do. Are we still gonna get married? Do we have to? So here's the request. Brian, can you save him before the RSVPs go out? I kid you not, 3 times from 3 different young women, all married, who I did not know, who had a fiance, who had a crisis of faith within 6 months of the wedding, all called me in 2 weeks' time. It was like a broken record. I was thinking, did someone put out a billboard? You know, is your true love not believing in God? Call Brian, see if he can save you. Like I always tell people, I can't save anybody. That's not within my power. I don't know what you're expecting, but I'll be happy to have lunch. Okay, so I have lunch. And, I was early in my PhD program, so I'm awash in a lot of philosophy and all sorts of things. And I sit down and I go, so nice to meet you. What's the question? And the question that comes out, they all had the same question. They said it slightly differently, but it sounded something like this. Here's the problem why I'm having trouble believing in God. How could a good God allow bad things to happen to good people? Have you ever heard that question before? Really common question. Early in pastoring, I made the mistake of believing that was their question. I made the mistake of believing that was the question they actually were concerned about. Well, that makes sense. That's what they asked. And so I go into philosophy mode. And I go, well, did you know that there's actually numerous plausible reasons why you can maintain that there is a moral God and a good moral God in a universe, and yet evil does exist? There's actually numerous ways, different philosophy that you can, lenses you can look at through, that's not an inherent tension. So I go into all this sort of stuff, feeling, good about myself. Good pastor, right? You know what they all did? They walked away going, oh, thanks, Brian. That was really helpful. In that way that they mean it wasn't, but it's like the nice thing to say, right? That's so helpful. And they walk away. I'm scratching my head. Go, why are we even here? You know what I realized later, from a pastoral perspective? They're not asking the question, why does a good God allow bad things to happen to good people? You know what they're actually asking? Why did God allow that to happen to me? That's what it is. Now, the safe thing to do is, well, it's a philosophical, that's my concern. It's just philosophy. Friends, it's almost never that. Unless you're a geeking out seminary student or philosophy major, most people don't actually care. There's a block going on in their soul. There's something going on in their heart. And like Adam and Eve, when this realization, the knowledge of good and evil and how far short we fall of it, the tendency to hide, to pull away, to cover ourselves. There are more people who have lost their way in faith in their journey with Jesus because the inability to process tragedy. And when tragedy strikes, I just find myself going, but why? But why? But why? And if I can't get past the why, and for some of us, we just go, I don't know if I can do this anymore. To follow Jesus, when things are going well, when the sun is shining, when it's like that really nice temperature outside, just past when we were complaining that it wasn't warm enough, and just before we're about to complain that it's too warm. You know, like a Sunday like this, I mean, it's gorgeous outside. It can be easy to follow Jesus. But what about when tragedy strikes? Do you have a faith that can overcome? Part of that ability is going to be tied to how we answer that question of why. So, I'm sitting in that lunch with these 3 different guys. I don't think any of them changed their opinion, and all 3 still got married against my counsel. I was like, just wait a little bit, talk it out. But you know, you got venues, and you know what they needed? First and foremost, if I were to go back in time and if I could do it and kind of be a better pastor in that moment, I think I would speak to the heart first before we would get to speaking to the mind. So here's what we're going to talk about the book of Ruth. This is where this all connects for us. Ruth is an amazing story. If you haven't read it, you could probably read the story in 10 minutes, you know, depending on your reading speed, 10, 15 minutes. It's actually only 4 chapters long. This is a copy of the book, just the text of the book of Ruth, right? One side of the page is blank for notes. I mean, it's not long, 4 chapters. And it's one of the most unusual books in the Bible. First of all, it's written from the perspective of a woman. Most of our texts are not, or they're more neutral in their presentation. That's a fascinating thing. It's a book that actually doesn't talk about God very much, which is also kind of fascinating. Ruth herself was not of the nation of Israel. She was a Moabite. That's really fascinating. All right, there's so many things that are interesting about this book, but I want us to see kind of the forest for the trees here. We're going to talk a lot about the literature and some of the specific words that are used, the distinct theologies of the text. We're going to read it well, but I want us to really engage the heart of the book, which is, what do we do with tragedy? How do we see God in our story, particularly when it's really, really challenging? And in some ways, Ruth is kind of like comparable to Job. This person who's gone through this sort of suffering, there's this divine action that's happening somewhere else, but you know, he wasn't aware of it, she's not aware of how this is all going to play out, and she's just living her life, a very normal, mundane life, taking step by step and trying to find faith in God along the way. And I'm believing, church, if we can actually follow in some of Ruth's footsteps, then we're going to be able to navigate the tragedies in our own lives and actually be able to help others do the same. I want all of us to walk away from these next 8 weeks with the faith that can overcome and maybe even grow a little bit closer to Jesus, not in spite of, but maybe in fact of tragedy. When we look at Ruth chapter 1, here's the premise of this week. Tragedy is inevitable. Don't waste it. If you were sold an idea that following Jesus insulated you from problems and trials, I hope you got a warranty on that, okay? Because that's not how it works. And in fact, there's little correlation to the hardships, the tragedies, the things that dropped into my life, and the fact of whether God loves me and is pleased with me. You've got people who are walking a righteous life, and it's like it just doesn't work out. And things they wanted, they don't get. Things they didn't want, they got. And then you've got people who are walking around actively defying God, and it just seems like doors are being thrown open left and right, and they're, living a good life. And the psalmist talks about this. How is it that we see the righteous do this, and it seems like, at least in the short term, like the wicked are thriving? How do we process that? Tragedy is inevitable. If you're following Jesus, it doesn't insulate you from it. It's inevitable for everybody. It's an interesting thing to be a pastor for a lot of reasons, but one, you journey with people through some really beautiful times of life. You're there for, celebrating a blessing on a new child in a household. You're there for a premarital sort of counseling. You're there at the wedding, but you're also there when there's a diagnosis of cancer. You're also there when someone got admitted to the hospital for the last time. Right? So you interact with people in all different stages. And even people in the best of health, even the people with, the most circumspect of lives, tragedy is inevitable. But there's a blessing. There's a blessing if you can journey through it the right way. This is a book about Ruth. Let me begin by reading just the beginning of Ruth chapter 1. This book is called the Book of Ruth. You see, you guys are so smart. This is unusual because if I just read the book, I would actually argue this is not about Ruth. Now, historically and traditionally, it's always been named the Book of Ruth, but Ruth is actually she speaks the least in this book. In fact, this book has a lot more to do with Naomi and Boaz than it has to do with Ruth at all. Why is it still called the Book of Ruth? We'll get there. But let's begin in Ruth chapter 1. And I want you to just give it a little bit of context here. Ruth 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. Now, let me just kind of orient us to where we are in the narrative, the salvation history in the Bible. So this is happening adjacent to the book of Judges. This is happening in a similar time if you have read any of the stories in the book of Judges. This is like a little mini spin-off series in the broader, Netflix drama of the book of Judges. Here's an individual story where Judges is about nations and kings, and this, judge raised up an army to fight against this nation. This is like a little human story in the midst of that larger narrative. We'll come back to some distinctives about it in a moment, but let's continue reading. The name of the man, this is the one who left, was Elimelech, and the name of his wife, Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. Now, first thing I want us to grasp, and this is why we do this together, because some of the background may be a little hard if you're not familiar with it, but the first big thing I want you to take away from this story is messy. This story is messy. There's a couple of reasons I say that. One, it begins with this idea that there's a famine in the lands. There's an irony here, by the way, because the word famine, you could translate it. It's almost personified. In Hebrew, it could be translated as there was a famine that stalked the land. It's like there's this creature that's coming after you. And there's this person whose name, the husband, means God is king, living in Bethlehem of Judah. There was 2 different Bethlehem locations. This was Bethlehem, Judah. And so here's this famine that's stalking a man who says God is king, who is living in a town called Bethlehem, which means the house of bread, the house where you find food. This is the irony. Here's a person saying God is king, an Israelite, living in a place called the house of food. And all of a sudden, a famine comes, and he departs Israel and leaves for the land of Moab. Now, in the book of Judges, here's an idea of just the big concept of the book of Judges. You'll see this little image here. Judges is a very cyclical book, and so it goes in this sort of pattern where the Israelites are serving God. They, over time, start to despise what God has told them. They fall into sin and slavery. Judgment comes because of their rebellion, generally in the form of some other nation and military. They ended up being enslaved or oppressed or killed. And so they cry out to God and they say, God, would you indeed save us? So God raises up a judge. That judge, there's various of them in the book, delivers Israel, and then they start to serve the Lord again. But you know what happens? They go right back through the cycle over and over and over and over. And in fact, that's the entirety of the book of Judges. God, we love you. Actually, I'm kind of tired of this. Oh no, life is bad. God, do something. Thanks for saving us. I love you again. I'm kind of tired of this. Let's do something different. Like just over and over and over. It's like this sort of fishbowl Christianity, every 3 seconds. You kind of forget what God did. Right? This is what's happening. And so the book of Judges is very clear. I'm bringing these things, external forms of punishment, famines, all these things, so that you will turn back to God. Now, if we come back to the book of Ruth, he decides not to. I'm not going to go through this. I'm not going to do this whole thing with the judges. I'm not going to stay in the lands. I'm going to go to Moab. And Moab, there were cousins speaking, a nephew of Abraham. So they were kind of like relatives in Moab. I'm going to go there. But it's just going to be for a little while. It kind of gives the impression, here's this guy who instead of staying under the hand of God and repenting and learning from it, goes, I think I'm going to head somewhere else. And so he goes to Moab, bringing his wife and his 2 sons with him. Now, how does that turn out? The text continues here. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives, and the name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. Now they lived about 10 years, and both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. This is messy. It's really messy. They went, we're going to sojourn. It sounds like Abraham. He goes, I'm just going to take my family, and just for a little while, we're going to leave Bethlehem. We're going to leave Israel, and we're going to go to Moab. So watch my land. Wait till I get back, friends and family. We're going to go to this place, and it's just going to be a short trip. 10 years later, the sons get married. The father dies. There's no kids. Now, it's a little bit hard for us in this context. Whenever we say things like the walk, 20s to mid-40s, pre-kids, right? That would have been unthinkable then. Unthinkable. First of all, life expectancies weren't really that long, but you kind of got on it with families. You got on it with kids. That was how, you made an income. That's how you were able to work the farm. That was who supported you whenever you were unable to support yourself. It wasn't like they had Social Security. So all of a sudden they go and they're going to find this. It's just going to be for a little while. 10 years later, they're still in Moab, but tragedy has struck. The husband is dead. The sons took Moabite wives, which is controversial in and of itself. That was something that you'd kind of look askew at. And then at the end result of it, they didn't even have any kids. And then the sons died. It's like everything that you were hoping you would avoid. I'm leaving because I don't want anybody to die. I want us to thrive. And it's like every single thing went wrong. You ever been in that situation, by the way, where you're like, I'm going to leave from what God has where he told me to be, but it's just going to be for a little while. And then you wake up and it feels like a decade has gone by. Sometimes people do that. I had somebody come up to church, which is funny, because now I've been here, I guess I'm starting my 7th year here soon. And somebody walked in and they said, what's your name? I said, I'm Brian. And they said, oh, that's so nice to meet you. I go here. And I'm thinking, I've never seen you in my life, I'm here every week. They say, yeah, this is my church. I go here all the time. I said, well, it's nice to meet you. They say, who are you? I said, I'm the pastor. Felt a little embarrassed. She felt a little embarrassed. I said, well, you must have been here in the last 6 months. I was like, I've been here 6 years. She goes, wow, has it been that long? Guys, that's kind of what happens, right? It's kind of what happens. I'm going to journey away from God. I'm going to kind of go my own way. I'm looking for a blessing, but I'm not looking for it through the way God has told me to look for it. And it's like time just passes by. And you wake up one day and you go, has it really been that long? Naomi wakes up. This is actually a book about Naomi. The book starts with Naomi and her plight. The book ends with Naomi and her plight. The chapters begin with Naomi. The chapters end with Naomi. In fact, if I were going to pick what is the book called, it's not the book of Ruth. I would actually say it's the book of Naomi. She is one of the main characters through which we see all of this. So here's this woman. Her name means pleasant. She left with high hopes. They left for a better life and said, we'll be back. 10 years later, the bottom fell out. Now, what happens after this ominous opening? Well, the results were mixed. Obviously, what she was hoping for didn't work out. It was a messy story. It wasn't a clean decision. There was probably some good intention in that. There's probably some bad intention in that. But the results were decidedly mixed. Let me read to you verses 6 through 18. I'm going to read it. I won't have it on the screen just because it's lengthy here. But I do want you to follow along. Here's what happens in the aftermath. Ruth 1, verse 6. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law to return from the country of Moab, where she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. She set out from the place where she was with her two daughters-in-law, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, go, return each of you to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as he has dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Have I yet sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I would hope, even I should have a husband this night and should bear sons, would you therefore wait till they're grown? Would you therefore refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, for it's exceedingly bitter to me, for your sake, that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Then they lifted up their voices and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or to return from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. Now, what's fascinating about this discussion, there's a lot of interesting things happening. We don't have a lot of time to go into all of it, but Naomi's this person who it's almost hard to understand where is her mind at right now. Because you're leaving famine to go to something better, but you're kind of going out, coloring outside the lines of what God has said the pathway to blessing is. And so you go there, and it's like the bottom drops out. There were some good things. I mean, she got some daughter-in-laws out of it who were lovely people, but she lost a husband, she lost sons, which, by the way, was your financial security in that culture. There really wasn't means to take care of yourself outside that, so she's destitute. A decade's gone by. She's got no grandkids around, and she doesn't know where her next meal's going to come from. So, back in Israel, they've already experienced God's blessing again, and so she's going to head back. And so she's trying to go back and release her daughters, and she's got this almost amazing belief in God at this point. Here's just a couple of things to highlight here. Look at these verses, how you see this. For she had heard in the fields of Moab that, who? The Lord had visited his people and given them food. Her framework, her way of thinking was, it was God who brought the harvest. She's seeing God's hand in just the natural course of life. Look how she continues. She's also talking about more here. For she had heard in the fields of Moab that the Lord had visited his people and given them food. She also says this, may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. By the way, when she's using Lord here, she's specifically referencing the God of Israel by her language. It's not just the general bucket of God. You know, you can say, God bless you, and you're thinking, which God? Which God are you referring to, right? She specifically uses this ties back to Yahweh, which the Moabites worshipped a different deity. They actually were worshiping multiple, but they were called the children of Komesh. They had a different God. And she's not just saying a general blessing. She's actually tying it back to a faith in Yahweh. She says, may the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. Look how she continues. She says this, no, my daughters, for it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. So the natural course, whether famine or produce, she sees God in it. When she's talking about her blessing that she wants on her Moabite daughter-in-laws, believing that God is not simply going to care only about the interest of one community, but she's actually praying God's blessing on the Moabite people and believing that God cares about them and could bring a blessing in their lives. And so she prays it over them. And then at the end of this is fascinating to me. She says, it is exceedingly bitter to me for your sake that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. Even in the tragedy, she sees God in it. Now, there's some people who do this. You're holding two truths, and the tension becomes a problem. So some people resolve it when tragedy hits. They go, I only see God in the good. If something good happened in my life, I go, praise Jesus. I got that bonus I didn't see coming. Praise God that this, situation, the person was sick and they were healed. I only see God in the good. And when something bad happens, I go, well, that was the devil. Or that was just bad luck. God is only in the good. And I don't know if he just wasn't around the bad. I'm not even going to think about that. God's just in the good. There's another group of people, by the way, it's mostly based on your personality, who only see God in the bad. Whenever I, get that thing, I go, well, it's so great. I worked hard for it. Or what good luck. I feel good about that. But when something bad happens, why did God allow this to happen to me? You know what's interesting? Naomi holds both. You know, a sign of maturity, by the way, is the ability to hold two things in tension without allowing one to overtake the other. She holds both. God is in the blessing of the land. God was in the famine. God was in the bringing these daughters into my family. God was in their barrenness. God was in the fact that now there's at least somewhere I can go back to, but God has dealt with me bitterly. She still believed. Amidst all of this, Naomi still believed. Here's the tension I want us to face this morning. Standing alongside Naomi, God allowed the good and God allowed the bad. God allowed the good and God allowed the bad. Whenever we come up with these situations, if you're going to be real about this and honest, and I want to invite you to do something for a moment. I want to be very sensitive in this, okay? I'm wearing a pastor hat right now, not just expositor. I want to talk to you as a pastor for a moment. I think part of us being able to have a mature faith that can thrive and even step into tragedy, to not just privatize our grief or to walk away and go, and since I don't understand, I don't know if I can even believe in God anymore. To do that, I think Ruth offers us an opportunity to stand alongside these characters as they face their own tragedy, as they process what that means, as they look to see God in their story. I think it's an invitation for us to also find God in our story. So here's the tension, the heartbeat. Next week, I'm going to go into philosophy and how we logically think about why does a good God allow bad things to happen, good people. But we'll do that side of the brain next week. I just want to speak to the heart right now. And if you're willing, even if it's just a small crack, I want you to just consider for a moment, what is the worst thing that's happened in your life? I think for most of us, we can pull something up pretty fast. If not, you're blessed. What's the worst thing that's happened in your life? The hard truth is, God allowed it. God allowed it. I'm not saying he caused it. I'm not saying God was pleased with it. But he did allow it. And if we don't come to grips with this, in the safety of a story like the book of Ruth, and we wait until it strikes us square in the eye, when all the emotions are flooding and the stakes are high, friends, you're going to have a really hard time. I want all of us to engage and to mature in our understanding of how we face tragedy. I want us to do it in the safety of this book, to prepare and mature our hearts, because tragedy is inevitable. But I promise you, there can be something beautiful on the other side of it. The question comes up, why? If we don't answer this now, then we're going to have a hard time in the moment because we're so flooded with emotions. Here's just some of the questions I hear all the time. Why did God allow it? Doesn't he care? Is it my fault? Was it the fault of someone else around me? Is God not as good as I thought? What could I have done differently? Where do I go now? Will it ever be the same? How can I trust? What about the next time? And the questions just come and they come and they come. You know what the challenging thing is? When I sit across the table and someone is just using a bunch of words to ask one question, why? The sad truth is, I don't know. I don't know, friend. And all the study in the world, all the philosophy, all the linguistics, all the biblical knowledge does not answer, at least in specificity, why? Remember I said this is related to the book of Job. We have the privilege as the readers of that book to go, oh, God was talking with Satan. There's this larger thing at play, and he's trying to teach this valuable lesson. Job didn't know that. The whole question, just the whole book over and over and over is why? And do you know what? By the end of the book, God never answers. God actually talks who. I'm not going to answer why, Job. I am going to answer who. I want to point you back to my character. When we come to this tragedy, this why, how you resolve that tension will make or break you. Let's resolve it well. Look how the story ends. Ruth chapter 1 kind of ends with them coming back home. Now remember, Naomi's name was Pleasant. She was going with a husband, 2 young boys. They were kind of living the dream. Probably she was called Pleasant because of her, visage, how she looked. This young woman, top of life. They've got all this ahead of them. Here's now, a decade later, coming home. No husband, no sons, no financial security. Starting over and coming back pretty haggard. So, the 2 of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred. The word could be like murmur. It just shockwaves through everywhere. Did you hear Naomi's back? Did you see what happened? Where's the rest of them? Where's the caravan of stuff? And just all the town talk. When they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman said, "Is this Naomi?" There's a bit of a bite in that, people. There's a bit of a bite in that, okay? It's a little bit of, was that Naomi? The pleasant one? She said to them, "Do not call me Naomi. Call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." It's the word for bitter. I'm not pleasant, I'm bitter. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. By the way, she doesn't say the Lord emptied me out. There's a little bit of a difference in that. But what God allowed has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has testified against me and the Almighty has brought calamity upon me? Her belief, I believe that God could bless you, even though you're a Moabite. I believe that God has caused the harvest to go. He caused the famine to go. I believe that God has been in the hand, at least allowing this tragedy in my life. She believed, but that belief turned into bitterness. Some of you here, some of you watching, you may know what that tastes like. So, Naomi returns, and Ruth, the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. You know, as the worship team comes up, we prepare to close. You're thinking, this is a really bummer of a message, Brian. I was hopeful you were on vacation. I thought you'd come back a little bit more relaxed, right? I love Ruth because Ruth is a really honest look at things we don't normally honestly talk about. And like the little kid that started to grow up, whenever an injury happens, we privatize our grief, we hide our pain, and we pull back from God and others. It doesn't feel safe. We cover ourselves and we hide. I want us to use this as an opportunity, maybe just to have the safety of standing alongside another person in the history of faith, Ruth and Naomi and later Boaz. How do we think through this? Not just so that we understand a book or a person's life a long time ago, but how we make sense of our own lives and how you see God in the tragedies that will inevitably occur in your life or in the ones that you love. The why is a mystery. I'll talk a little bit about that next week. But I want to respect the mystery. I don't want cheap answers here. Because ultimately, this is a book about us. The Bible says that every one of these words was written for your edification. You know, Ruth is now up there in heaven. It's us who are journeying along like she was. So, how will you face tragedy? Tragedy is inevitable, but tragedy is also an invitation. I think over these next few weeks, we have an opportunity to enter into a more mature faith, not just for your own journey, friend, but for the people who are journeying next to you and struggling. If it's an invitation, then we don't want to waste it. Next week is the why. If you want some philosophy, you can come. But in the meantime, what can you do this week? I want you to ask that question. What really is the worst thing that's happened to me in my life? To sit with the uncomfortable truth that in some sense, God allowed it. Not maliciously, not out of a desire necessarily to punish or to harm. But there is a truth, if you believe in an all-powerful God, that he did allow something to occur, an emptying, and maybe it left you bitter. Let me invite you to face it head on. And if that feels uncomfortable to you, do you know what the Bible actually talks about when we do this? To face it together. Find a mature person who can stand alongside you as you look at this hard truth. Don't make it a knucklehead friend who's got terrible advice. Please pick a wise person. Reach out to me. I'm happy to do it. We have members who are trained in care. We've got members of our prayer team who can stand. We want to stand alongside you as we face it together. And I'm believing, friends, that if we can do that, and that's the hard part, you're going to find something beautiful. Father in heaven, thank you for these stories. Thank you for a curtain that's pulled back in a life that in some ways just feels very mundane. A woman and her husband and traveling and kids or no kids and sickness. It's not kings, it's not judges. It's just a person. And Father, there's something so deeply relatable in that. May we have the courage to stand alongside these characters, to hold our whys as we look at the who. Father, may we see your name and your character in the midst of it as we journey through, trying to parse out, to do our best to be faithful. Father, may we find a blessing for it on the other side. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.